Unbelievably, it's August and we're getting ready for kids to be going back to school. So super exciting time of the year, but also time to really be intentional in thinking about who our students are and the importance of intersectionality. So we're looking forward to this today. Next. I am Christina Collins, she, her pronouns. I'm the executive director of Honesty for Ohio Education. Very excited to be here. I want to introduce a couple of our other team members. We have Matina on the call, who is our comms and programs director. And we have Sam Shim, who is on the call, who's our community outreach liaison. Honesty is a coalition of 70 organizations across the state of Ohio. Our mission is to convene, educate, and activate individuals and communities to protect honest and inclusive education, building a more representative democracy for every Ohioan. And we do our work at every level of the state, from local school board meetings all the way up to the state house. Our advocacy work is oriented around the whole child framework, which Ohio uses, which we'll see in just a second. That places the student at the center. If you want to go to that one. Yeah, it places the student at the center and says that all students should have healthy, safe, and engaging environments in which they can learn. It's important honesty that students also see themselves in their learning, which is a part of this intersectionality conversation. So if you want to go back to the agenda for a moment. This is what we'll be doing today. So we have Arianna Kelawala with OPAWL, and we also have Derek Burtch with Erase the Space joining us today. Just a few housekeeping notes as we go through. All the videos and slides will be uploaded to our Lunch and Learn page at honestyforohioeducation.org. Everything in yellow that you see is a hyperlink. We will also be dropping links in the chat, and you are welcome to drop questions into the chat as we go. And if you haven't already, feel free to take a moment to introduce yourself, your pronouns, your organization, or where you are in Ohio. Next. So we mentioned Ohio's Whole Child Framework. Again, we see it as part of our advocacy work to steer our legislators, our local school board members back to whole child, centering the whole child in all of our conversations. So a lot of our work currently around policy at the State House is oriented around some of these bills. We're just going to capture a few of the bills in this session, because thankfully the State House is on summer recess, and we hopefully will not see them again until November, when they will be coming back for what is called lame duck session. It's the last 2 months of the year, the last 2 months of this General Assembly before they roll over into a new General Assembly. And a lot of what they do during this time is try to shove through a lot of bills. We have bills that are called Christmas tree bills, where there's a lot of unrelated stuff that goes into a single bill. So we are following closely on these bills. First of all, Senate Bill 104, which was previously known as House Bill 183. Senate Bill 104 was a college credit plus bill, where they rolled in the anti-trans bathroom bill, an unrelated bill being put into a college credit plus bill. So we have been actively fighting against the anti-trans bathroom bill, if you've been following that. We also have House Bill 556 and House Bill 662, which are attacks on libraries. So 556 criminalizes teachers and librarians for pandering obscenities without any definition of what obscenities are. And we also have House Bill 662, which defunds libraries that display matter harmful to juveniles. Again, harmful not being described in the bill. We're following House Bill 445. Honesty has done a lot of work around this particular bill across the state of Ohio. If you've heard of an organization called LifeWise Academy, House Bill 445 would require all school districts to allow programs like LifeWise Academy to take students from their school day and provide religious instruction. So that's a bill that we're working on. And then finally, Senate Bill 83, which we really have to celebrate our success on this. There was a strong push for this bill to be moved during June before the State House went out of session. And Honesty initiated an action alert around this, which is an opportunity for Ohioans to email their legislators and let them know that they do not support a bill. We had over 110,000 people submit action alerts in opposition to this bill, which is it's the Higher Education Destruction Act. It basically attacks higher education. And we were successful in keeping that out of consideration for June. So we will definitely be circling back to that in lame duck and having to fight that again. For more, we do have a legislation tracker, and I think our hot sheet was also linked in the chat. But those are great ways to keep up with what's happening in policy in Ohio around education. And if you haven't already done so, sign up for our newsletter, because we tell you every week what is happening at the State House and areas where you can take action, ways to take action, who to contact, and we try to make the best use of your time as we activate around bills that do not support honest and inclusive education for our students. Next. Again, we do our work from the local school board level all the way up to state agencies. This is some information about the State Board of Education and the Department of Education and Workforce. These are their next meetings coming up in September. They also have a little break here in August. Next. And then finally, I want to highlight Honesty Reads. If you haven't seen this, we post on our social media and share out in our newsletters a weekly list of inclusive books that are centered around a theme. So this week, the theme is tied into our Lunch and Learn today around intersectionality. So these are great resources, great lists of books that we should be using in our schools and classrooms. Next. Just very briefly, we're going to be talking about intersectionality today. Arianna is going to help define that in her presentation. So I am very excited to introduce our first speaker, Arianna Kelawala. Arianna is an undergraduate student double majoring in political science and women's gender and sexuality studies at The Ohio State University. She is also an organizer with OPAWL, building AAPI feminist leadership. Arianna is deeply passionate about educational policy and works for OPAWL as the campaign organizer on the Educating for Ohio's Future campaign, which introduced and aims to pass House Bill 171, a good bill, to update the social studies model curriculum to incorporate the histories of communities typically left out of the curriculum. So with that, we will stop sharing and enable Arianna to share her screen and have her go ahead and take over.
Hi all, thanks so much for that warm introduction, Christina. I'm gonna go ahead and share my screen, and can you all see it? Are we all good? Perfect. Thank you guys so much. Well, I first wanted to say thank you so much for having me today. Honesty. I'm so excited to be here with all of you. Like Christina said, my name is Arianna Kelawala, and I'm a student at Ohio State and an organizer with OPAWL. And I am the organizer for the Educating for Ohio's Future campaign. But today I wanted to start out with just a quick definition of what intersectionality is. So intersectionality is a term coined by a Black feminist lawyer, Kimberly Crenshaw, and it's a lens or framework of understanding identity and oppression. So I wanted to pull her words straight from her. She said, intersectionality was a prism to bring light dynamics within discrimination law that weren't being appreciated by the courts. Crenshaw said, in particular, courts seem to think that race discrimination was what happened to all Black people across gender, and sex discrimination was what happened to all women. And if that was your framework, of course, what happens to Black women and other women of color is going to be difficult to see. Okay, so intersectionality explained. So it's helpful to think about intersectionality as multiplicative rather than an additive framework. So what Crenshaw is saying is that in these court cases, they were saying that Black women experience racism and women experience, as a whole, they experience sexism, but it wasn't understanding how sexism and racism can interact and produce even like additional forms of harm. So for example, Black women experience oppression, not just only as Black people, but also as women. And also not just the sum of this experience. So it's not sexism plus racism, but like sexism times racism is kind of a helpful way to think about it. Um, so these experiences aren't additive. Your different forms of oppression kind of overlap and create new experiences that marginalized people face. So if you're a queer marginalized person, you're not just going to experience like racism. If you're like a person of color and queer, you're going to experience a particular form of queer phobia or homophobia in the context of the fact that you are also a person of color. I hope that makes sense. Crenshaw does it much more eloquently than me, and I'm happy to share resources on more about what intersectionality means as we kind of move forward. Okay, so I want to introduce my organization, OPAWL. OPAWL is a grassroots community that organizes for social justice and elevates the voices, visibility, and progressive leadership of Asian, Asian American, and Pacific Islander women and non-binary people in Ohio. By co-creating an organized and intersectional feminist member-led community, we are building collective power. So we're an organization of Asian, Asian American, Pacific Islander women and non-binary people. So that's the intersection that we fall at. And we organize folks in this space to build power collectively, to advocate on a variety of issues, whether education, reproductive rights, immigration, many different issues that affect us and our community. Who am I? I wanted to share a little bit about myself. I am a student who was encouraged by her teachers to take political action and never looked back. So if you're an educator, I only have my teachers to thank for where I am today. I'm a organizer of 6 years, previously working in gun violence prevention and union organizing with OFT, the Ohio Federation of Teachers. I was so lucky to get to work in both of these spaces prior to that. I'm a student at Ohio State, a hopeful lawyer, and I'm also the daughter to 2 South Asian immigrant parents. My parents immigrated from India. So I thought for the intersectionality conversation today, it was relevant to discuss a little bit about what my identities were and kind of the oppressions that I might be facing as a South Asian woman. So I want to chat a little bit about what is Educating for Ohio's Future and the campaign that I work on as well. And then I'll kind of put it in the context of intersectionality as well. As I do this, I want to make sure that we have like something to kind of ground ourselves in. So I want to play this short documentary. It's like 2 minutes long that we had an amazing short filmer come do about our campaign. It's really beautiful. If I'm gonna start the sound, there's not sound at the very beginning, but there is kind of talking in it. So please give me a thumbs up if you guys can hear, just so I know that it's working. Or someone can come off mute and tell me if it's not working as well. I'm gonna go ahead and start the video and yeah, we can kind of sit back and enjoy.
We're in Ohio.
Right there.
Okay. Look how far that is from New York. That's where my parents landed. So keep one finger there on New York.
On New York?
Right. And then keep it there. We're going to turn, turn, turn. I should have gone the other way. Okay, we'll go the other way. Let's go the other way. I'll keep my finger here. Now you find Manila.
I found Manila.
Okay, so look where your finger is and look where my finger is. They are literally
Across the world.
it's across the world. That is where Lolo and Lola
Whoa.
traveled.
The chair now calls on Lisa Factora Borchers and Rosaria Borchers, and you may begin.
My name is Rosario Factora Borchers. I'm here to ask you to support House Bill 171 so I can learn more about my family's history and how they came to this country. I also want to be able for my friends to learn about my family, especially my grandparents. I call them Lolo and Lolo, which means grandfather and grandmother in Tagalog.
Knowing all of this about Lolo and Lola, how does that affect how you decide to use your voice in the world?
What runs through the family is a big story, and I want to have a big story like the rest of my family. And that encouraged me. Sometimes it makes me even stronger to use my voice. And I thought in my head right before I was going to speak, I thought, why couldn't other kids do this? Like, I want other kids to have the same experience that I did.
And how would you feel in the classroom if they're saying, all right, today we're going to be talking about Filipino Americans and Filipino immigrants who came to this country?
This is my favorite subject of all time.
So that was a little introduction to our campaign. Shout out to Lisa and Rosie. They have the most beautiful story, and I feel like that really just like grounds me in like why I'm here today, why I'm here talking to all of you guys, and why what we're talking about today is so important. So I'll talk a little bit about what HB 171 is. HB 171 is a bill that would update Ohio's K through 12 model curriculum for social studies to include the histories, migration journeys, experiences, contributions of all of these different communities here in Ohio. So we're an AAPI group, but we are working on a bill that is going to talk about African American communities, Jewish communities, Arab American communities, Appalachian communities, Latin American communities, and so many more. So this bill kind of embodies solidarity and intersectionality and all of that good stuff. So I guess why, what about this bill is intersectional? Why is this bill important to intersectionality? So intersectionality is a lens that brings forth the overlapping oppressions that multiple people from multiple marginalized backgrounds face. Sorry, I can't talk. So for intersectionality to be useful for students, for teachers, we have to learn about identity first and foremost. If students don't understand their identities, intersectionality is not useful, it's not helpful, because if you don't know what it means to be, for example, Asian American or a woman, or the histories and terms and oppression that comes with those identities, intersectionality isn't really useful anymore. So intersectionality is very rooted in identity, and it means that if we want intersectionality to be present and like a part of our classrooms, first, identity and understanding identity has to be part of our classrooms. So we must learn about the identities and histories of our community to allow us to not only understand the historical discrimination and oppressions that communities have faced, but also how people from marginalized backgrounds resisted and fought oppression. So in the histories and model curriculum that we're hoping gets implemented, we're hoping to hear about the contributions of our different communities to the civil rights movement. For example, I didn't learn until I was in college that the Asian American community supported the Black and African American communities in the fight for civil rights in the United States. Folks like Yuri Kochiyama, among others, helped work right alongside Malcolm X and Martin Luther King Jr. In the fight for civil rights. And I never learned that Asian people were even a part of the civil rights movement until way, 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 way later in the future. So if I had learned that, I think I would have had a really like different view on how racism affects me, on how solidarity with other communities of color impacts me, how the Asian community is related to other communities of color, all of these things. I think it's really important to take time to understand our identities and intersecting oppressions, but also learn how other people are impacted by their intersectional identities. So teaching about the communities and histories of all of these different groups would allow students to hear about the historical oppressions and resistance and contributions of all of these different communities, which I think really allows folks to build empathy, show up for one another. And that goes for teachers and students. I think teachers can show up better for their students in the classroom if they're thinking about their students' identities and intersectionality. And for teachers to be able to do that, it's important that teachers get the education and resources that they need to learn about what their students might be going through or what their students' communities have gone through, as well as what they're like, why there's those communities are present today. For example, Columbus is home to like the third largest Somali community in the world. And it's really important to understand the historical context of why that happened. How did Somali immigrants get here? All of those things are super, super important to showing up for your students, because you might have students who are Somali or whatever identity in your classroom that are being impacted by this. And it also allows students to build empathy for one another, right? Like I said, I didn't know anything about how Asian Americans contributed to the civil rights movement. So I didn't understand how my history might be connected to the history of my Black and Brown peers. And it was really, really helpful for me to gain that understanding, because it gave me something to relate to. It gave me a piece of history that I could connect to and better understand how my communities were rooted in how my community's oppression is rooted in the same thing the other community's oppression is. And I got to learn that our communities work together, like our communities have a history of working together. And no matter what like white supremacists decide to say, like I think it's particularly relevant in this moment that like we understand the complexity of our communities and identities and how they work together. And lastly, I think recognizing how student identities combine to impact them allows educators to support their students, and students have the language to describe what they experience. So I think it's equally important for educators to be able to kind of like know what their students might be going through, but also for students to have the language to describe what they're experiencing. So I think like for a long time, I didn't have the language to describe when I was experiencing sexism, racism, or both, because I didn't learn about the history of my community in the classroom. I didn't learn about, when I learned about Indians in the classroom, it was in reference to Native Americans. It was not in reference to the community that I come from, or my parents came from. And it made it really hard to describe when I did face incidents of like racism or sexism or a combination of both, because I didn't have the language to even like begin to talk about my own identity and the fact that I was experiencing discrimination or harassment based on those identities. So I think it's really important for our students to be able to advocate for themselves when they do experience one of these forms of oppression and harm that comes from these form of oppression. But students don't all have the language to be able to do this in an easy and confident way. It's already scary to like try to stand up for yourself and advocate for yourself to teachers or to another student if you feel like you are experiencing something like this. So I think it's even more important that like students have this language, that they have the history, that they have all of these tools to kind of ground themselves in and have access to as we kind of talk about our real life day-to-day situations and what we might be experiencing. So that way, if something happens, they can describe what actually happened and they know that it was not okay. And they know that it was something that shouldn't have happened. So if you're interested in getting involved with the Educating for Ohio's Future campaign, feel free to check out our website, either at educatingforohiosfuture.org, OPAWL, follow us on Instagram. That's our handle on Instagram. And you can feel free to shoot me an email with any questions. Definitely stay tuned for updates. We have a lot in the works and have a lot of upcoming projects, both legislative and community wise. So yeah, that's a little bit about me, intersectionality, and the Educating for Ohio's Future campaign. I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing my screen. Thank you all so much for letting me chat a little bit today about my community and experience, and I will go ahead and pass it back to Christina.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Arianna. That was so great, so insightful. I appreciate it so much. And we will come back to questions. Just a reminder to everyone again to put any questions that you may have in the chat. I am now going to turn it over to Derek Burtch. Derek is the co-founder of the educational nonprofit Erase the Space and current English teacher at Olentangy High School. He has taught high school English for 16 years, including 6 years at North Union High School and 7 years at Olentangy Liberty High School, where Erase the Space was created and cultivated in partnership with Amelia Gordon and South High School in Columbus. Erase the Space engages students living in the segregated metro area of Central Ohio in democratic discourse across their segregated school districts through classroom learning exchanges. These exchanges are curated to engage students in conversation about shared social issues in order to move towards collaborative imagining of solutions. Derek is also one of the founding members of Next Hub at Otterbein, a center for teachers to collaborate across districts in anti-racist and liberatory efforts to support and provide solidarity for teachers engaging in acts of disruption across the Central Ohio area. His published works can be found in the English journal, Theory into Practice, and in the book of compiled essays titled The Ethics of Digital Literacy. Derek is also now part of the third cohort of the Coalition of Health Leadership Initiative for Truth, Racial Healing, and Transformation. Thank you so much for being here today, Derek. We'll turn it over to you.
Thank you so much, Christina. I might be able to share from my phone a little bit. Start broadcast. It's just going to look all funky. Let's see if this works. Let's see. Go here. Go here. Can everybody see what I'm doing?
Yes.
All right. So it's so happenstance that Arianna and I are on the same call because I worked on that campaign with her in support as one of the teachers that visited legislators in their office for Educating for Ohio's Future. And a lot of that is because that's what Erase the Space does. We facilitate these year-long exchanges, but I'm also a part-time teacher now. So I teach in the mornings, and in the afternoons, I work on Erase the Space. I was pretty heavily involved in honesty since its inception, and took a little bit of a break because we were actively working in Columbus on stopping the closures of schools. So there's a lot of energy put towards that over the past 6 or 7 months. And now I was really excited to be invited back. So I appreciate it. But we exists because we think that there's not enough intersectionality of identities in our schools, especially if we're talking about geography as part of the intersectionality of our identity. We know that geography comes with a caste system in America, and our goal in Central Ohio and beyond, we're working on getting some exchanges started up in Cleveland, is to engage students beyond these boundaries that have been drawn, that they're literally not supposed to go across, especially not learn with someone that's on the other side of that boundary, because we know that multiracial coalitions of people make change happen. And so our goal is to kind of poke holes in those districts and have teachers go through an onboarding and training that makes them think about themselves with intersectional identities so they can facilitate these exchanges without doing more harm, because it could happen that more harm is done if somebody doesn't really think about what they're doing here. And when I say that, it's because 93% of the teachers in Ohio are white. And oftentimes they have not thought about themselves with intersectional identities because they have not thought about themselves as with a racialized identity. But we have them, white people. And ours, as Arianna's talking about the intersection of identities and how oppression can compound, when you're talking about identities that are seen as the top of the hierarchy of human value that is present in America, really having to think about ourselves in the classroom in this way, having to really think about, what does my identity say when I'm in front of the classroom? And what does that mean for me and how I have to account for that for my students that are in front of me? So interestingly enough, this is just some things about Erase the Space. One of the things that we like to set ourselves apart from other exchange programs is because we engage students in work to do together, this shared learning. Oftentimes in pen pal programs, what you'll see is just people writing back and forth without addressing the power dynamics that exist between students, and it can become very voyeuristic. So extracting something from someone else because of their intersectional identities and what that can teach you about the world, when in reality, that doesn't actually challenge the power dynamics that exist, or teach students that they are part of a racialized caste system, and that if they are at the top, then they need to do some work to dismantle that. And it's really on them to be the ones that make that change. So I could talk a little bit about what we do at Erase the Space and how we try to address those issues in intersectionality from the start. I'll say that as Amelia and I created this, we spent a lot of time at a coffee shop going through the things that we needed to go through as two white teachers who were leading this work, and think about what our role was, what lane we should be in as we do this work, and that we are amplifying student voice where it should be amplified, and using our expertise and care for students where it needs to happen. And so we came up with this curriculum that we think helps students amplify that voice and really understand who they are, but also communicate in a very honest and clear way who they are to their partner as they go through this exchange. So the first thing we have them do is write a letter or some sort of piece that explains who they are to their partner, because we want them to have narrative control throughout this process. You're going to tell your partner who you are. And that way, all these other narratives that surround them can fall to the wayside, hopefully, so that that person has a direct letter from you that says, this is who I am. And we can start to think about those other mythologies that surround them kind of going away. We believe that if you don't do that, oftentimes context collapse can happen and the narrative will shift back to the dominant culture and what those mythologies are. And so we don't get to see those intersectional identities. What will happen is myths will prevail, and you can kind of see those other narratives falling on top of that person, kind of limiting the other people who would be engaging with them from seeing their true self. We know that this is true in person, but also in our online spaces. Students are digitally segregated as well. I can get back to the story if anybody has questions, but it's about students. You know what? We'll go ahead and talk about it. So students oftentimes don't think about themselves in this way. And so this is another important reason why we talk about it. and why, if things do come up in exchanges, teachers are there and have done the training to go through the tension with students. So this is a picture of my student, Kelly. This is the first year we ever did this. And you can send a picture with your letter if you'd like. This is the picture she decided to send. She's like a goofy girl. Her partner at South High got it, turned it over and said, don't like it, don't like her, don't like that she sent it to me. And Amelia in that moment had a chance to either protect this exchange or protect her student. And she chose to protect Journey and said, you know, I understand it. And I'm with you. You don't have to continue with this, but I do want to know why you say that. And she said, because I can't send that picture to her. And they said, say more about that. Like, I need, like, you're getting there. She said, because if I sent that picture to her, she would say I was ghetto. I don't like that she sent it to me because I can't send it to her. So already we have students that are thinking about and know about their intersectional selves and the mythology that precedes them, while students on the other end of this do not. And so that's why it's really important that teachers are thinking about this so that they can address that rather than go, oh, let's just avoid that conversation. What we were able to do with that is talk with Kelly about this. Her and Journey ended up meeting during the exchange and are still text. They're seniors in college and both graduating at the end of this next year. So the thing that really bonds people that can move them beyond that is shared learning. It's work to do together. It's John Dewey. Instead of just putting kids in a room together, why don't we give them like a common purpose that they can work on so that they're building a table together rather than feeling like they're being invited to one or they're opening space for someone. Like they have something to do and they both need each other. And they're both experts in their own lived experience, which is what we try to create and have these exchanges revolve around. And finally, they meet in person. We don't visit each other's schools because social capital is real, mythology is real, and we know that in Central Ohio and schools around Ohio, all that narrative is invested and embedded in certain communities in different ways. So we're not going to go there. We're not going to say like, hey, let's have a day in the life of. No, because that's not what this is about. It's about finding third spaces to collaborate towards something new. And so we use libraries, Columbus Museum of Art, OSU gives us space sometimes, Otterbein does. But this is all about breaking the mythology of good schools, bad schools, and what and who deserves what. So this is a video of Journey and Kelly talking about that incident later. But here's the thing. Schools are still bastions of white supremacy culture. And that's why it's important for teachers to think about intersectionality, because the majority of the people that are in those classrooms have not had to think about it. And when they don't have to think about it and they choose not to, their students suffer, as Arianna has just finished talking about, right? And so whose job is this? It's everyone's job. But spoiler alert, it depends on identity markers and intersectionality. Why? Because that's how power works in our country based on a hierarchy of human value. So my argument is that white teachers who make up 93% of the teaching force need to be trained on this. We like to do that at Erase the Space. I'd like to see it in every single education program before teachers come out, because the disparities exist. We have a workforce of over 100,000 white teachers serving a student body that is majority non-white. We have teachers that do not have the ability or tools to connect to their students, as Arianna has just presented, because it's built for them. And then they can go in and just say, like, why don't you do it my way? Why don't you position yourself next to whiteness and really, really try to make sure that you can be more like me? When we could have teachers that are going in, recognizing who they are, what they represent in the classroom, because it was a big deal for me. I am a white, straight, cisgendered male. I represent all of the intersectional identities that are oppressive. And so by doing that, and by really investigating myself, one, it really set me on a self-work journey beyond my racialized identity and the embedded misogyny and everything else that I had taken on over the years. But it also opened my classroom up for students that get to like have voice, autonomy. They get to push back. We get to have a power with relationship rather than a power over. And to tie it back to Arianna, like, I actually got to connect some of my students to OPAWL. and my student Zombie got to go and be at the opening or the presentation of the bill, and got to be in the picture when the bill was presented and had its press conference. And then we got to write an op-ed together about like why it's important to really look at your identity as a teacher, because then you can see like, oh, I thought that my like library was woke. And then a Southeast Asian student said, yeah, I don't identify with Hanif Abdul Rakib's take here. I don't understand like his take on the 4th of July, because the only time I have fireworks is Diwali. So I had to really then take my work further and understand that beyond just the white-black binary that exists in a lot of the popular culture, my job as a teacher is to look at every single person in front of me as a very valuable individual with a history behind them, and then look at myself and say, what can I do from my positionality to lift these students up? And it takes personal work, but it also takes structural change, because this is not a mandated thing in Ohio schools. And if it's not, we got a large teaching population that can retreat to comfort and probably do a lot of harm if they're trying to get students to do well in school, because oftentimes that is trying to create proximity to whiteness. I don't know. I'll stop sharing my screen because that's pretty much it for me, and can open it up for questions now.
That was fantastic. Thank you for all of that. I'm gonna give people time to put questions in the chat. I wrote down all these quotes that you said. You were like, that was very quotable. I need to like, some things now. And like I said, I have a few questions already, but I want to start with this, and maybe Derek will start with you because you just finished talking about this. So we know that there are staffing shortages, teacher shortages. Generally, survey data tells us teachers are unhappy. They are up against so many political walls and policies and the emphasis on testing and all of these things. But we know that teachers have good hearts and want to do the right thing. So how does a teacher who wants to do the right thing and doesn't have the supports of being able to do the PD, or the district doesn't care about the PD, how does that teacher start to do the right thing?
How do you move beyond good intentions? It's a question that I struggled with for a lot of my career. And we started this because this was born out of that impetus. And one of the things that we did during the pandemic is we created Next Hub, which you had introduced. And it's an online professional development / learning community that we give CEUs because we know that districts are not giving this kind of professional development. So finding these, what Jarvis Gibbons would call fugitive spaces to do this work, and join an online community of teachers that share those values, because oftentimes geographically we just can't do that. As frustrating as it can be to meet online, sometimes it transforms space. And so what we've found when we have our like teacher empathy calls, or we call them Beyond the Book Club, it's like, you read a book, great, let's do some self-work together before we go into the classroom and just like start rapid firing social justice warrior things. And what we found is that like, if I'm coming to this from Olentangy and I know that like my friend at Northland is doing this and my friend at Franklin Heights is doing this and this person over at Hannah is doing this, I can go in with a little bit more fire in my belly to do the right thing. It's about that solidarity across districts because it's happening everywhere. But finding those co-conspirators so that you can move beyond the good intentions of like, I know what's right. I know this would be good for my kids, but I have bills to pay.
Right. Arianna, do you have thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think it's really important to think about teachers and students and kind of we know that students will have better outcomes if we make it easier for teachers to do this work, right? So I think, I mean, that's exactly what our bill, HB 171, tries to do, is provide these resources to teachers by updating the social studies model curriculum. There's a state created resource that's handed to teachers for free online of ways and to talk about the histories of all of these communities. There are resources that come with the model curriculum that teachers can just click on, and there are like sample lessons and tools that teachers can use. So yeah, our bill is entirely about trying to make this easier for teachers to do the work, because we know teachers want to do this. Teachers are already, like Derek and so many others, are taking time out of their own days to like try to make this happen for their students because they see a need. So yeah, I think it's really just about trying to break down barriers for teachers. Um, and then also, like, if there are any students listening to this call, like, students, go to your teachers and talk about why this is important to you. Like, I really want to encourage young people and students to have a conversation with their teacher to say, like, hey, I don't feel represented by the things that I'm learning in my classroom. Like, I wish I had done that when I was a student in high school or middle school or even younger. Like, I really think that, like, sometimes teachers like can be unaware that students don't feel represented because they're doing their best. They're doing as much as they can. And they, or like, you know, you kind of get into like a pattern, like with teaching, like you go through the same lessons every year, you go through the same like things over and over again. And like, while you go through the same content, your student dynamic and makeup is changing, right? So students are getting more and more diverse. So it's time for like the curriculum to change along with that student body. We really need to see alignment there. And I think that students, like, don't be afraid to like push and say, hey, like, this might have been perfect 10 years ago, but now, like, for this moment, like, we need something better and I deserve something better. So kind of on both ends, like, we need to be supporting teachers and doing that work. And then students need to be pushing their teachers as well to like really put in that work. Because I love when Derek, you said it's everyone's job, because it really is. It's parents' jobs, it's districts' jobs, it's our legislators' job, it's our job. Like, it's everyone's job to put in this work. And yeah, it's our job to try to do everything that we can to make it better for students at the end of the day.
I'll add on to that too, that if students go, right, and a teacher's like is resistant to it, you know that that's a teacher that maybe you're going to challenge. If you go to a teacher and they're really receptive, that's a power with relationship right there that can really do some great things. We changed policy at Olentangy Liberty because there was microaggressions happening to a student because we worked together, right? So you find those people that will work with you. And to anybody that's listening teacher wise, if you hold power or sway or any kind of institutional privilege because of your identity, risk it. It's your job to risk it. Because there are people that do not hold those positions or identities that are targeted who are doing the work right now.
That's fantastic. I mean, just looking at any teacher can look at what they teach. If you're teaching 90% dead white guys, no matter what the topic if it's 90% dead white guys, you're doing something wrong. Like, what does it take to realize you're doing something wrong? And I say that as a former English teacher that taught the canon, and we bounced through dead white guy from dead white guy to dead white guy. And looking back on my own teaching experience and thinking, man, I could have been doing so much better by my kids if I had taken the time to think about being more inclusive at that time. So I really appreciate that. Arianna, what is the status of House Bill 171? What's the future? What's it look like? What's going to happen?
That's a great question. So we're in constant conversation about House Bill 171. It's had two hearings, a sponsor testimony and proponent testimony hearing, where HB 171 received over 81 written testimonies in support of the bill, which is amazing. Right now, we like recognize the legislature is full of like a lot of people who are in opposition to everything that we stand for, right? Like in reality, like that's what we face, but our bill is a bill that everyone should be able to get on board with. Everyone should want students to have I am being kind to the legislature, but our students want everyone should want students to feel like they belong in the classroom. Everyone should want their students to have empathy for each other. Everyone should want students to feel seen and heard. Everyone should want their students to have better academic outcomes. We know that teaching about these histories makes students have better attendance, better grades. Like we know this is true. Like the research has been done, and like everyone should want these things in a time of like chronic absenteeism and test scores really still rebounding from COVID. Like this is a time to be like really supporting our students as much as possible, and like this is one of the ways to do it. And I don't think anyone, regardless of like party lines, should like be opposed to this. And right now, we are, like I said, in conversations, but we've talked to people on both sides of the aisle who are really supportive. And if House Bill 171 doesn't get introduced or doesn't get passed by the end of the year, we'll have to see with lame duck and the craziness that comes with there, like you said, with the Christmas tree bills and all that craziness. If House Bill 171 doesn't get passed by the end of the year, we have a Democrat and a Republican who have already confirmed that they will reintroduce the bill, because this is something that people care about. This is something that every community is impacted by. Yeah. I think like we should be talking about how Appalachian history isn't taught in our classrooms. Like representatives that represent like districts that might not have a lot of students of color should be saying, hey, maybe it would be good for my students. Maybe my students would be better prepared for the workforce if they did have the chance to learn about these histories, if they got the chance to learn about their own histories. So I really think that this appeals to people across the state, across party lines, across race and ethnicity and background. I really, really am optimistic for the future of the bill. And yeah, I am hoping, I mean, hopefully we'll get the bill passed by the end of the year, but if not, like I said, we do have a Republican and a Democrat that have agreed to co-sponsor this bill going into next year. So I'm excited and optimistic about the future.
That is wonderful. Derek, do you have any thoughts? Any final thoughts?
I think that it's important to make that first step, because it can be paralyzing. One, if you haven't done some of this work before, because I know that there are a lot of younger teachers, generally white, who are like, well, what if I get it wrong? Well, like you're going to.
Yeah.
And that's where you circle back and you apologize and you get better. But like you're not going to get better by being inactive. And it could also be paralyzing to look at the opposition, like Arianna's talking about, and then be like, well, why introduce this? Because you don't know what will happen when you can build that solidarity and you can build that momentum. And now all of a sudden it goes from just Mary Lightbody introducing it to, if this doesn't go through, we're going to try again. And we got a Republican to co-sponsor this. So every step forward matters.
That's great. Arianna, do you have any final thoughts?
I would say I'll just echo what Derek said about like taking that first step. Take action. Like you don't have to take action perfectly to take action, and any action is better than no action, especially if you're listening to feedback, if you're listening to folks who have been doing this. Like what you're doing is something, and that something is going to mean something to your students. If you're a student, that's going to mean something to your teachers. And yeah, like if you want to introduce a House bill or a resolution to pass HB 171 in your district, like literally every little bit matters. Like it doesn't matter who you are, you can do this work. It doesn't matter like what your background is. Like this is something that impacts all of us. It's something that impacts like literally everyone. There's no one not impacted by this type of work. If you want to get involved, I'm sure Derek would love for you to join a racist space, and I would love for you to join House Bill 171 and Educating for Ohio's Future. So yeah, just reach out, ask questions, take action.
Fantastic. Thank you both so much. This was wonderful. Thank you again. Loved hearing from you both today and hearing about all the different work that all of your different groups are doing. We have just a couple of slides of events that are coming up that we want to make sure we mention from Honesty's standpoint. So Honesty is partnered with 6 different groups, including the ACLU, Equality Ohio, Innovation Ohio, NAACP, and Red, Wine, and Blue to run this Summer School Ohio Civics 101 series. Honesty will be presenting on Monday, August 12th. We are 2 sessions in. These have been really, really well attended. Like I said, 101 level of what's going on in the state of Ohio. How does governance work in various institutions across Ohio? We also have the 2nd annual Trans Block Party coming up on Saturday, August 17th. That is in the Columbus area. On September 14th, on the next slide, we are partnered with School Board School in Cincinnati for Advocate for Education Day. So join us in Cincinnati if you're able to. That goes from 8:30 to 2:30. We have about 30 different panelists that are presenting that day. We've got a whole slew of people from Honesty coming to present on education policy in Ohio. And then Honesty is also a community sponsor for an upcoming City Club event on August 16th. Enforcing Civil Rights in Schools Today is the event. And we have a discount code. I'll leave it to Martina to add that in the chat when she has an opportunity. On the next slide, just briefly, if you're interested in joining our Honesty teams, our community members across Ohio who are getting activated and engaging around education issues. These are people who are honesty-minded folks in that they support honest and inclusive education. And we are activating, again, from the schoolhouse to the state board to fight for those kinds of experiences for our students. If you haven't already, on the next slide, we have some various ways that you can engage with Honesty, from our newsletter to our coalition calendar to various events that we have planned. Feel free, again, those are all links. We'll put some of the links in our chat box. But otherwise, after this is posted online, feel free to sign up for anything you haven't already signed up on. And finally, we'll end on our resources slide. Honesty has a plethora of resources available to help support you where you're at in your engagement with activism around education in Ohio. So feel free to reach out, and if we don't have the answer, we can steer you to the people that do. Again, it's 1 o'clock, and we are so appreciative, Derek and Arianna, of you and your time today. Everyone, be sure to join us next month on the first Friday of the month for our next Lunch and Learn. Thank you all.